Hey everybody, so this morning I am on the West Fork Trail in Oak Creek Canyon in Sedona, Arizona. It's kind of between Sedona and Flagstaff, and there's a huge elevation shift between these two cities. So there's about 4,000 feet, 3,000 to 4,000 feet elevation gain from just Sedona to Flagstaff. Oak Creek runs along the entire section. The watershed from the San Francisco peaks feed Oak Creek. There's this beautiful riparian course. So all these deciduous trees and wildlife. The canyon walls are massive, and you can just see how this waterway has carved and shaped the landscape. And it's a truly special, magical place. This particular confluence of the West Fork and Oak Creek is home to over 100 bird species. I often see the acorn woodpeckers up in the trees, and the beavers are another important animal. They build the dams and steward the precious landscape. So I thought it fitting to paint here right after the full beaver moon in November. And again, I'm using a limited palette, so that's going to be cadmium, yellow medium, alizarin crimson, titanium white, and ultramarine blue. Working on a smaller panel, 9 by 12, but it's vertically formatted to try to capture that sense of scale of the cliffs. This is one of my favorite places to come in the late summer, early fall season, when you have the apples that are ripe and you can pick them off the tree and eat them, and they're so delicious. I'm actually painting in the ruins of an old homestead where apple orchards were established. So you've still got those here, and producing fruit every season. The creek is a wonderful place to go swimming when it's warm enough, and there's little mini slide rocks that you can slide off of and take a dip in the beautiful healing waters. The busiest time is probably right now in the fall. So I got here at 8 a.m. and the parking lot was pretty much full, and it's a weekday, and for good reason. It's incredibly beautiful and sacred. Something that is a little bit disconcerting is how heavily trafficked the trail has become. But what inspires me so much is just to see the amount of awe and wonder and refuge this brings to so many people. And I know that when a place is really celebrated, it thrives and it's also protected. So just a reminder to anyone who travels to the West Fork Trail, especially for the fall foliage, just to stay on the trail and respect the vegetation and the wildlife. But it's really, truly one of the most magical places that northern Arizona has to offer. So it's well worth a visit. And I was so incredibly grateful to catch the first light on the canyon walls this morning. There's just this beautiful light that hits the sandstone, and then you've got all these fall colors that are still a bit more in shadow, and then some of those start peeking into light during the course of the video. So I hope this introduces you a bit to the area if you aren't familiar with it. And if you are, then I hope it brings some of that magic back into your heart. So thank you so much for joining me on this beautiful fall day in Oak Creek Canyon. I hope that you guys enjoy, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments. As usual, this painting will be available for purchase, so I'll put a link down in the description. And this is just, you know, a reminder to get outside, go to your favorite places, touch a leaf, draw a leaf, smell and breathe in the fresh air, and, you know, maybe do something kind for someone today. Leave nature a bit more clean and restored than how you left it, in whatever way that means to you. So yes, celebrating the great outdoors through painting and celebrating beauty in every moment. So I'm starting with the yellow dominant orange wash. So I've got a little bit of alizarin in there. And so I've just mixed that with the cad yellow medium and really thinly just covering the whole panel. And then gonna wipe it all down so that it's a pretty thin stain. And this is going to help me to really gauge the values because there's just so many shifts happening here. And then I'm using my like little squeegee wiper tool to carve out the face of that rock that's just getting that really intense morning light from the sun just peeking over. And then I've got this lower cliff wall that is kind of jutting out at a different plane, and that's not receiving light yet. It's still in shadow, but it's receiving some reflected light from the canyon walls that are getting lit up. And now using my alizarin crimson to make that initial sketch. So I've got these cliffs that are kind of towering above, and then just a little bit of the ground plane will be visible. And then I've got some trees because I want to capture some of those fall foliage colors too against the sandstone. So I'm starting with kind of more of a brownish red for this wall that's in shadow, and it's going to be a pretty thin wash so I can, you know, layer color over it as I continue. And as I get more of the piece blacked in, it'll become clear, you know, where to put some of those pops of more orange light and some of that grayish desert varnish, or maybe the water stains. And you can see how it's a little bit like darker towards the top, kind of between where the whole face is in shadow and the cliff is in light. So when you have those transitions, painting from life makes it really easy to tell kind of where the shadow colors deepen and where they receive light from different sources. And I'm mixing a really kind of beautiful purpley color for the shadows that some of these rock faces are casting. And this is just such a big rock wall that I couldn't fit it all in the video and get the painting close enough. So, you know, right at the top, it kind of, there's like this really beautiful kind of like a two-dimensional perspective. And I'm blocking in the tree color, which is all in shadow at the moment. So that is going to be a yellow orange, and that's why I want to be really sensitive to how I paint some of that reddish orange in the shadow. I don't want it to compete with the tree. And I think eventually I'll add some of it into light, but for now I'm playing with the idea of, painting the light as it is with all of this in shadow except for the top of the rock there. So my orange is just the alizarin crimson and cad yellow, but obviously there's a lot more yellow in it for this tree. And then just a touch of ultramarine blue to kind of, make it a darker or like more middle value shade. And just to kind of desaturate it from being orange and more of like a brown. So when you look at the foliage, there's a lot of beautiful browns, and this one has got more yellow mixed into it. And there's some pops of that next to it, and then there's also some really beautiful pine trees. And some of them just actually dropped into light. So that's going to be kind of a fun light and shadow play off to the right of that more central yellow tree. And then my ground plane is going to be a desaturated green. So, the cad yellow medium, ultramarine blue, a little bit of alizarin, and then a little bit of white. Because it is a lighter value, it's kind of receiving some of that light from the sky. And then there's some grasses that are lighter as it recedes. So there's like 2 tiers of grasses, I would say, here in the foreground that I'm trying to communicate. And I really want the part of the cliff that's getting light to be more of the focal point. Like I want your eye to kind of be lifted up to that, just the way that mine were when I arrived at this scene and experienced like the awe and the grandeur of this face. And so my sky color is going to be not as light as that. It's going to be more of like a middle to light value blue. And this is more ultramarine with titanium white, just because of the palette and, the section of the sky that it is behind these canyon walls. And you can see how I kind of use my sky color to carve into the shape of that rock also. So I've made it a little bit more, even more narrow at the top. And that kind of gives it more of that 3-point perspective, like you're looking up at something. And just mixing a lot of white into kind of like a yellowy alizarin mixture. And then using, less white to communicate, where the rock is moving into shadow, or, even some of those shadows in the rock are like a light orange, I would say. So that's part of like finding the value group and, attempting to stick with that throughout the painting. So alla prima works really well when you have an idea of where your different value groups are in the piece. And that's something that really has changed the game in plein air painting for me a lot. Is just seeing the harmony in those groups of light and painting accordingly. And then I've got like a a little bit of green vegetation up there. And then some of it is in light and some of it is more on the shadow side. And because it's further in the distance, I don't want to add too much detail to it. I still wanted to read as far away and capture that sense of depth. So even though it's the focal point, really trying not to add a lot of like detail. So, I'm avoiding some of the cracks in the rock and articulating some things, which I may or may not adjust when I get home. But you can just see how quickly the light is changing. And so what's important is that I just get all of the main information down. And even at this point, it's a great little study that shows me the colors that I'm working with out here. And I can even take some of that like purpley color and add a little more yellow to it, and then drop that into the rock face that's in shadow to communicate some of the gray that's in there and give that face a little bit more dimension. And then on the ground here, I've got, some brighter greens. And I can also save some of my darker accents for last, for when, the trees meet the ground, or more of those core shadows in the trees. And then it does, seem pretty unfinished at this point. But I'm right at the refining process now, since everything has pretty much been established. I'm just getting some of those trees that are in light in there. I really like how that green looks against kind of the gray purple of the shadow. And so really now I'm just filling out these trees and carving into them a little bit. And dropping a little bit more variety into the grasses. And as I continue to wrap up this quick field study, I'll just, mix my darkest dark and add in some tree branches to some of that foreground foliage, and, fill out those pines a bit more. And then I think dropping in a few highlights into that main tree and the one behind it. So just the cad yellow medium with some white mixed into it, just a dash of the cad yellow red. And then also bringing some of that orange back into the wall behind it, just to tie it all together. And then these greens that I have that are fully in shadow are really the ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, with a little bit less of the cadmium yellow medium. And then I've got, some cool greens in the bushes down below as well. And I might, add some highlights to some of those grasses in the ground plane later on too. But I think I'm, wrapping it up with this piece, and it was just such a magical, really special experience to be out here at this time of day. So thank you so much for being here. You can see some of the finishing touches I made, and the colors are just magical. So I will see you guys next time. And again, as always, thank you so much for being here and following along.